Okay, the recording has started. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June webinar. I hope you are all doing well. So we just have several items, reminders, but I would like to start off with some what I believe is good news, and that is some information about policy changes related to the high school equivalency testing. And this is not just for our students. This is a change to Pennsylvania high school equivalency policies. In the past, I'm sorry, I think someone has their mic on, so if you could please mute yourselves, that'd be great. Thanks. In the past, up until, in the past, a person had to take and pass all of the GED test or all of the HiSET test and in either Spanish or English in order to be awarded the Commonwealth Secondary School credential. That we have changed now. So now students can combine subtests from the GED and the HiSET to be awarded the Commonwealth Secondary School diploma, and they can combine Spanish and English subtests to get the credential. So, you could have someone who takes and passes the reading language arts and the science under the GED test, and then takes the math and the social studies in HiSET. And as long as they meet the passing requirements for those subtests, it will combine and give them the credential. Our vendor for the Records Diploma Center has a process in place that does an analysis that is research-based to combine them. Similarly, if you have someone who maybe takes the social studies and science and Spanish and passes them, but then takes the reading language arts and the math and English and passes it, as long as they've met the passing requirements for all of the sections, we can combine Spanish and English to award a credential. We made the change in Diploma Center system, and it's been made retroactive to January 1st, 2014. From what Diploma Center tells me, as soon as we flip that switch, 2 people got their Commonwealth Secondary School diploma by combining HiSET and GED tests, and 22 individuals got it with the combination of Spanish and English. So we hope that everyone is happy with that. The last bullet doesn't impact our students, but it is something that I thought I should let you know because it is a change in interpretation of PA Code 4.72, which is the code that authorizes PD to issue the Commonwealth Secondary School diploma and says who is eligible to take the tests. Because of how PA Code is worded, the Office of Chief Counsel has determined that individuals who are enrolled in secondary school may take the tests while enrolled in secondary school. And if they're 16 or 17, they still have to meet the additional requirements of, a letter stating that it's necessary. But they can take the tests while they are enrolled, but they cannot get the credential while they are enrolled. So I just wanted to let you know that. Obviously, our students cannot be enrolled in secondary school. So as I said, this will not impact your students, but in case you've been hearing about people who are taking the test while they're still attending high school, as long as they have one of those letters or a court order, they are in fact allowed to take the test while they're enrolled in school. I didn't have anything to do with that decision. That is from our Office of Chief Counsel. I'm going to start with the 2023-24 grants, since I know that.
Amanda, I'm
Yes.
sorry, Amanda. We had a question about the GED, the high
Okay.
school equivalency tests. There are 5 subtests on HiSET, 4 on GED. How will it be determined when a student achieves their credential if they do a combo of the 2?
So if a student passes the reading language arts in the GED, that is considered to have met the requirements for both the HiSET reading and the HiSET, I don't know if it's a writing or language arts, I'm not quite sure what they're called. If the person does the HiSET, they will have to pass both of those in order to have it replace the GED reading language arts.
Thank you.
And as I indicated, somehow or another, Diploma Sender contracted with someone to do some research, and they did an evaluation of that, so that any combination of scores reflects HiSET's requirement of a combination of both minimum scores and an average score. So that is all built into Diploma Sender's process. Okay. Any more questions on that?
Nope.
And I will remind you that is, so the combination, if a student takes all of the GED but just takes it in a combination of Spanish and English, that will show up in their GED record. Same with HiSET. If they would take the full battery of the HiSET but some in Spanish and some in English, that should eventually show up in PSI's HiSET account. But if they're doing it a combination of GED and HiSET, the student is not going to see that in either the GED record or the HiSET record. They are going to have to log into their Diploma Sender account to see that. Okay, so the 23-24, these are just budget reminders. And so I do want to remind everyone that even after the division has approved your grants, there are several additional steps that the grants have to go through before payment is made. And also, no funds go out until a 23-24 state budget has passed. And there are several steps that have to take place in the budget and comptroller's office after the budget has passed before payments can go out. I have no idea what's happening with budget negotiations. So I can't tell you whether I think the budget's going to be passed on time or not. But, as a reminder, in Pennsylvania, the both federal and state funds are appropriated in the state budget, and they can't go out until the state budget has passed. So I think everyone is certainly hoping that the budget will be passed in a timely manner, and that there really won't be any delay over how funds normally go out, but please keep that in mind. For the rest of the information on this slide, state leadership grants, these don't apply to you, and you'll, of course, I know you've been communicating with Christine, and those of you who applied for Section 243 grants, because that was a competition, this slide doesn't apply to you. The grant awards are in the approval process. So we're not addressing Section 243 grants here either. So the Adult Basic Education Direct Service, Family Literacy Direct Service, and tutoring grants are open and are due July 7th. If you can get them done sooner, that's wonderful. If you will not be able to get them done by July 7th for some reason, please let your advisor know now. So, if you happen to know that, your fiscal person or that there are people who have to be involved in the grant process before you can submit it to us. And they will not be able to get it done by July 7th. Please let your advisor know now. Please do not, email your advisor on July 7th at 4 p.m. and say, sorry, we can't get it done. Let's see. I sent out an email on June 12th, 5:09 p.m. with a document called Grant Submission Guidelines, which is just a reminder. It does not cover absolutely everything that you need to do in your renewal grants and the budget. So you also need to look at the 2023-24 draft guidelines. Those draft guidelines are on the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage. They are draft. We're still working on getting the final guidelines done. But if you go to the Division of Adult Education Grant Competitions webpage, there is a draft of the 23-24 guidelines. Because they are continuation grants tied to a multi-year grant contract, your grant signatory will not be completing the sign and submit step because there is no contract to sign. And just as a reminder for everyone, you do need to enter teacher prep time separately from instruction in the salary section. Some reminders around professional development time. All professional development costs should be paid by state funds. So of course, for the tutoring and the family literacy grants, they are state funds, so that's not a problem. For the Adult Basic Education Direct Service Grant, that means that all professional development costs must be allocated to the state 064 budget. I think I've mentioned this before, but the reason we are doing that is because WIOA actually defines professional development as an administrative cost. And so in the federal grant, that actually falls in function code 2300 and is subject to the 5% cap or the negotiation. We, of course, don't think that professional development is administrative. And, so to avoid having to have everyone do, negotiations so that you can do professional development at the level that we want you to do, we're just having you charge everything to the state grant. So what that means is there is not function code 2200 in the federal budget. And, your in-house professional development specialist's time doing in-house professional development specialist work will be in the state grant, the state 064. Their time supporting other staff with professional development will go in 2200. Their time participating in their own professional development to support their in-house professional development specialist work will go in 2200. If your in-house professional development specialist works with the volunteer classroom aides, the time the in-house professional development specialist is working with them may go in the 1692. As a reminder, the requirement for paid staff is to spend 2%, at least 2% of their time participating in professional development. That's a minimum requirement. Staff are allowed to participate in more professional development than that, and you can pay them with your grant for additional time. So it's not like they're limited to 2%. You can only pay them for 2%. That's just a minimum to make sure everyone gets some professional development. Another reminder, the 2% does not apply to your administrative support staff or the data entry staff. Although if you have new data entry staff, you do need to make sure that they complete that Introduction to eData course. For staff time participating in job-related professional development, It will go in whatever their function code is for their role. So if they're a teacher, it would go in 1691. If they're a student support specialist focused on barriers, 2160, which would count towards that 10% cap, and so on. And you need to have professional development as a separate entry from from preparation and from whatever their work time is. Any contracted professional development, so if you actually pay someone to come in and present or do lead professional development for your team, or any if your agency has a policy where they charge a certain fee per individual, per staff member, or somehow or another charges the grant for the cost of mandatory agency trainings, those all have to go in 2300 because we do consider those administrative. Reminder to run the PA Career Link. Please refer to the guidelines 608.3 number 6, which explains everything around Object Code 390. 064 grantees, so Adult Basic Education Direct Service, must use a portion of federal administrative costs for infrastructure cost contributions. That is a WIOA requirement. You may not use state funds instead of federal funds. Your state funds, so 064, this is the adult ed, your state 064 funds can only be used for infrastructure cost contributions that are associated with rent that you are paying for classroom space. Of course, some of you use local funds to contribute to infrastructure costs. That's wonderful. Please, in the contracted services section in the text box below the table, please just put a comment there that says, how you contribute to infrastructure costs if you are not using federal administrative costs. That allows us to know that you're meeting the requirement, even though there is not a dollar amount in that section. Any shared personnel costs or shared other costs associated with the PA Career Link are allowed, but they are not required. In the federal 064, they would go in 2300, 330, and in the state 064 family literacy or tutoring, 2600, 390 as a separate entry. As a reminder, you may use family literacy and tutoring funds to support infrastructure costs, but that is not required at all. So family literacy and tutoring grants you do not have to use any of those funds to support infrastructure costs. And then the state 064 funds, you can only use those funds if you're paying for classroom rent at the PA Career Link site. Christine, are there any questions so far?
No questions in the chat.
And please, as you are working on your grant budgets, please look at the budget sections. Please review them with any fiscal people who might be completing the budgets, because the more often we have to return them to you for correction, the more work for you, the more work for us, and the more delayed your payments get. Okay, year-end reminders. First of all, there is a section in the guidelines 700 that has due dates. So this slide does not replace that. This is just a highlight of that. So please go to that section and review all your due dates. The fourth quarter division quarterly expenditure report is due July 17th. Division policy requires that all data be entered within 14 days of collection. Therefore, eData will close on July 15th. All data, that is the last day that you can enter data. We strongly recommend that you get as much, that your data are actually all entered before that, and that gives you a little bit of time to run your data check reports and make corrections before the system closes down. So you really don't want to be using that last week before July 15th to be entering a whole bunch of data. You want to be working on that now so that you can use the time after July 1 to review your data as it is in eData, so that when you send your data quality validation forms to us by July 25th, that you are confident that your data are actually all complete and correct. For the post-secondary enrollment certification forms, there's not an official due date. I know many of you have been submitting them throughout the year, and that's great. That works really well for us. That allows Whitney to update our spreadsheet on a regular basis. But if you have not submitted them and the individuals exited and enrolled in post-secondary education or training prior to June 30th, please try to get those verification or enrollment certification forms to us by mid-August, because we're actually able to use exit plus enroll in post-secondary education as a measurable skill gain for individuals who did not show it in other ways, such as through a post-test or by earning a high school credential or a high school equivalency credential. As a reminder, we do need original signatures on those post-secondary enrollment certification forms. That is part of our data validation process that we have to have in place for the feds to consider our data valid. I believe Michael and Steve from the eData Technical Assistance office did a end of year webinar yesterday, and it was recorded and will be posted to the Pennsylvania Adult Education Resources website once it's captioned. So please make sure your data quality specialist and data entry staff review it to make sure that you are covering all your bases for end of year data entry. And the IELCE final report will be due August 1st. It will be done in SurveyMonkey the way it has been in the past. It's not ready yet, but we will get it out to you shortly so that you will have plenty of time to complete it by the August 1st due date. So data entry and reminders. This is not a complete list. These are just some important things that we want to remind you about. Throughout the year, you probably have students who come, you fill out an intake form with them, they go through orientation, or maybe they don't go through orientation, but then they never come and take an assessment, they don't start attending class. So all you have for them is an intake form. We have said in the past that you can hold those until the end of the year, just in case that student happens to come and take a test more than 30 days past the date that they completed the intake form. But you do have to enter those individuals into eData now. So it's the end of the year. We need you to enter them into eData with that complete intake form, even though they don't have an assessment, even though they haven't attended classes. We actually include these individuals in a report on the National Reporting System. I'm going to see if it will bring it up for me. So this is a required report in the National Reporting System. These individuals are called reportable individuals. And so we have to report on the people who show interest and intent to attend your classes, but who do not reach what is called participant status. They don't reach those 12 hours of service. So we do need you to enter those individuals into eData. For those agencies that have IETs, please make sure that in the class you have the correct special program type. I believe this was covered in the May webinar as well. So you have either IET with credential or IET without credential. That is how we find a class that is an IET to use for our federal reporting purposes. So if you don't have the special program type, it's not an IET. So please make sure you have that correctly. And then as a reminder, if you have students who took an occupational exam and passed it, you can enter that as a measurable skill gain type in eData.
Amanda, we do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Somebody's asking if it was incorrect to enter the students as they complete their intakes.
Right, so it's not incorrect, but what we have learned from some programs is they've had students come in, complete the intake form, maybe do the orientation, maybe not do the orientation. And then, you know, maybe they've addressed some challenges in their life, and then they come back, say, 2 months later, and now they're ready to assess. And if the agency has already entered the student with that kind of, I believe it's a current year start date or something, I apologize, I don't have the exact wording correct. But you know, the date for the year is more than 30 days. The assessment has now taken place more than 30 days past that student's current year quote unquote enrollment date. And so the test is showing up as invalid. Even though maybe what happened in that situation is exactly what we hope will happen when you have an orientation, right? You have somebody come in students come in who are interested, they go through the orientation, they have a conversation with you, and they're like, you know what, maybe right now is not the best time for me to do this. I've got a lot, you know, I just started a new job, things are a little bit crazy. I'll come back in a couple months when everything's settled. And that's when they take the assessment, because of course that would be best practices to assess them when they're ready to start classes. And then we have that gap that in which eData marks the assessment as invalid. And so we have given the guidance that you are allowed to keep those intake forms just in case a student does in fact come back. But that you can, and then those who do not come back, you just hold to the end of the year and enter them at the end of the year. I hope that clarifies kind of the stance on that. Did that seem to meet?
I think someone has their hand raised. Laura, if you want to go ahead, and then we'll have Corinne after Laura.
Thanks. Yeah, I understand the reasoning behind that. Would it be possible in any world to have that start date editable? Because if we don't have our intakes entered because of, you know, multiple sites, multiple agency,
right,
whatever, you know, we'll end up probably processing that student again. Just wondering.
That's something I'd have to check with MIS and the eData folks. Because I don't know the system well enough off the top of my head to answer that question.
Sure, thank
Corinne,
you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. So we can enter those students. We just need to be prepared that they're going to show up on our data checks as students that have intakes with no assessments. Like
yes,
be prepared
correct,
to explain it later on when it shows up in a data report is what we just need to be prepared for.
Yes, that would be something to be prepared for, yeah. Because those data checks, you know, the data checks are just a, hey, here's something that seems a little bit odd. Please investigate, and it might be okay, it might not be okay. So yes, as long as you know, okay, we're entering these individuals, you know, we know this individual is not going to come back because they moved or, you know,
Yeah.
for some reason, if you know that that person is not going to show up again during the program year and you just want to get them entered, yes, and then you would just want to be aware, as you say, yes, we know that this individual does not have an assessment. That is correct. Never took an assessment, won't have one. That student record is accurate. Yes, correct.
So if they do come back in that same program year and they do test, it would just be the same explanation why it shows that do they just need to redo the intake form, or is it the same explanation of why there's a sort of alert that the student tested outside of the 30 days?
That would be an explanation of why there's an alert.
Okay. Okay. Just so as long as we can explain it, that's what matters, because we just have personal policies on when we put in our data.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So if I can interrupt here and just say, if you have questions now at that level of detail, you need to, talk to your advisor or talk to MIS. Amanda might not have every little area of, the adult details page in her head right now for her to be able to answer that. Okay?
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Workplace literacy. We do not have, I don't think we have many workplace literacy classes. I looked in eData, I looked in the Access template. And I believe there are a couple of classes that do have the special program type. Sorry, there's a lawnmower right outside. Okay, they're moving away. I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not. A workplace literacy class is an adult education or literacy class that one of you offer in collaboration with an employer at a workplace or an offsite location, but that is specifically designed for incumbent workers or people who are going to be employed at that company, specific to meet their needs, and that is aligned with the analysis of job tasks for those positions, right? So a workplace literacy class is not workforce preparation activities, right? So if you have some kind of class that is literacy based, but also kind of focuses on, developing critical thinking. I mean, really, you're supposed to integrate workplace literacy. You are expected to integrate workforce preparation activities into your regular instruction. You shouldn't be having workforce preparation activity classes. A workplace literacy class is one that actually takes place at a work site specifically for employees who are incumbent, already working there, or who are getting ready to work there. And the instruction is designed to support them to do their job, and you've worked with the employer to determine their needs based on their job tasks. Those classes, if you're doing something like that, is a workplace literacy class and should be marked in the system. I did see a couple cases where a class was marked as workplace literacy, but it didn't really seem like it was at an employer. There may be classes in the system where you are actually doing a workplace literacy class, but you have not marked it as such. If you think that you have a workplace literacy class, but you're not sure, please reach out to your advisor and explain the class to them, and we can have a conversation and we can let you know whether or not you should mark it as a workplace literacy class or not. Okay, that's the end of kind of data entry reminders. Were there any further questions, Christine?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Final expenditure reports. These slides apply to all grantees. Your final payments will go out next week. If you're wondering when and how much, you can look in FAI. Any monies that you have not received during the monthly payments will not be dispersed until the associated final expenditure report has been submitted and approved by the division and the comptroller's office. So it is incumbent on you to make sure that you fill out the FER correctly so that we can approve it more quickly and that you can get any money that's owed to you, or you can return funds to us if you have received more than you used. The FERs will be available in early July. You can submit them anytime up until August 15th, which is the due date. Please, I know in some cases in the smaller agencies, the person who is on this webinar is actually the one who completes the FERs. But if you are not the person who completes the FERs, please communicate with the fiscal person at your agency who is doing so. Share information with them. Maybe ask to review them before they get submitted, especially around things that we ask you to correct every single year. Please do everything you possibly can to make sure that they are submitted correctly. I mean, I realize maybe your fiscal people aren't going to listen to you, in which case they'll submit it and we'll return it. But if you have any chance to review them, please do so. Some reminders around totals in the FERs. Part 2 is called the Part 2 Final Report Details in the Final Expenditure Report. It's the first section. The numbers in this section must be exact to the penny. This is what the comptroller uses to determine either how much money you have to return to us or how much money they still have to send to you. So the total receipts must match to the penny what is in FAI. It is not what is in FAI right now because June payments still have to go out. But, if you go in late July, mid-July, you should see how much money have you received from the comptroller. And what you enter in Part 2, total receipts, has to match FAI to the penny. If it doesn't, we will be returning your FER. Also, once you have completed all of the sections of the budget, reporting all of your expenditures, you look at the budget summary. There is a total in the budget summary of how much you have expended based on what you reported to us. The amount in Part 2, total expenditures, must match the amount in the budget summary to the penny. So please, that Part 2 final report detail has to be exactly right. If it's not, everything else in the final expenditure report could be perfect and we will be returning it to you. The other sections where the total expenditures need to match what is in the total in the budget summary is the agency activity summary, actual expenditures column, and the county served actual expenditures column. Those, so budget summary, Part 2 total expenditures, agency activity summaries, total actual expenditures, county served, total actual expenditures should all match. And unfortunately, there's kind of no way in the system to put in a rule to double check it for you. So you do need to do that manually. Please review section 606, 607, 608, and 609 of the guidelines for reminders around budgets. In the FERs, the description of the expenditures should provide details. You are reporting actual expenditures, and so you should be able to provide details about what those expenditures are. In the budget, it is a proposed expenditure, so you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to be for. In the final expenditure report, You're reporting exactly how you spent the money, so the description should be clear. It should be sufficient for advisors to determine if the expenditure is reasonable. So for example, $5,000 in rent could either be reasonable or not reasonable, depending on how many sites, what the space is that was rented, how frequently you used it. So your description needs to include the details that would make it clear to the advisor, is that $50,000 reasonable or not? When you're describing travel, what was the purpose of the travel? Is it teachers? Is it mileage for teachers traveling to and from class sites? Is it mileage for your student support staff traveling to meet with students? Is it mileage for your administrator or your program coordinator to observe teachers? Is it travel associated with PACE or other conferences? You need to provide those details. Excuse me. Don't just say textbooks. What textbooks? How many? Were they classroom sets, textbooks for students to keep, etc. Regarding equipment, you need to include, so in the equipment section, there is a text box and you need to put an explanation in the text box explaining the purpose of the equipment that you purchased. In the other sections of the budget, or the FER budget sections, there is a text box where you can explain things, but you don't have to. But in the equipment section, if you purchased equipment, you do need to put something in that text box. In the federal fund, in the FERs for federal funds, so the 061 and the federal 064, in the contracted services section, we expect to see an entry for PA CareerLink infrastructure costs. If you don't have them because you spent it with local funds or for some other reason, again, we do require you to put a note in the text box. Equipment is things like that have a generally useful period of more than the program year, and they're generally items that you would inventory that would have some kind of serial number or something like that, and that you would inventory. So that would be like your desktop and laptop computers, tablets, projectors, the owls, smart boards, things like that. If you're buying, say, a headset or speakers or mouses, keyboards, etc., that aren't necessarily inventoried, those you can put in the supplies section. It's okay to put them in equipment. If you put them in equipment, that's fine. But if you put a computer under supplies, we will return the FER to you and have you put any type of actual equipment in the equipment section. Now, I realize that in the overarching world of federal funding, $5,000 is kind of the threshold for whether something's equipment or not, but we are requiring you to report anything that is equipment that has a useful period of more than the program year and is generally inventoried in the equipment section. Any questions so far, Christine?
No questions in the chat, no hands raised.
Okay. Regarding the caps are on the grant amount, not expenditures. So for example, on your state 064, on the state grants, state 064 Family Literacy Tutoring Program, there's a 10% cap on function code 2160 and on 2300. But it is of the grant amount, not your expenditures. So I'm going to pick some easy numbers. Your grant is $100,000. Your 10% cap is $10,000. Whether you spend the full $100,000 or you only spend $85,000, you can still spend up to up to the $10,000 in 2300. And it will be okay. It's a percent of the grant amount, not of the expenditures. There are no waivers to the 10% cap, and you can't exceed them. If you're $1 over, we'll be returning it to you to reduce it. For the federal funds, as a reminder, there is a 5% cap on administrative costs, which in our grants are function code 2300 plus 5,000, which is the indirect costs. If your total exceeds 5%, or if during the grant approval process you negotiated a higher amount and you're exceeding that higher amount, you must submit a new request to negotiate before submitting the FER. So when you submitted the grant, you were either below 5% or you submitted the request to negotiate to us and we negotiated with you and approved a higher amount. When you submit the FER, the actual administrative expenditures must be in line with what was in the approved grant budget. And if not, you need to submit a new request to negotiate. Appendix E of the guidelines. Reminders about local match. First of all, they must be in support of allowable activities. So if something is not allowable with federal funds, then you can't, and you use local funds to pay for it, that's fine, but you can't report those local funds as local match. So, you know, if you use local funds to help students pay for the high school equivalency test, that is wonderful. We think it's great, but you can't report that as local match. If you pay money for a high school, for some kind of graduation program, that's wonderful, but that's actually not allowable with grant funds. Commencement ceremonies are not an allowable expense, so you can't use that as local match. Also, what you're claiming as local match must be reasonable and necessary, and they must support the grant activities for 22-23. So, for example, let's say you received a donation of 500 textbooks, but you only used 200 of them this program year. You can only report the value of those 200 books that you actually used as part of local match for this year. Now, you know, you might use the remaining 300 next year, and then you can report the value of those next year, but you can only report the value of things that were actually used to support the program in the current year. Federal funds cannot be local match. Federal funds cannot be used for local match for other federal funds. If you have grants from L&I or the local boards, it is most likely federal funds. The local board might say, well, we got this from the state, so it's state funds. There really aren't any state funds for Title I programs. It's almost all federal. So if you've got a digital literacy grant from L&I, that's federal funds. If the local boards are giving you some kind of money from their local WIOA funds, those are federal funds. They cannot be used as local match. It's great that they're doing it. It's wonderful that it's additional funding that you have, just can't be local match. As a reminder, you must maintain clear documentation locally to support any claims of local match that you report to us. A tracking spreadsheet, while useful for you, is not documentation. Last fall and in the updated Outlook Teams meeting that I sent for this webinar, I attached a local match verification letter that we created that you can use. If you have a form, if you have an internal form, a local form that covers all of the items that are on that local match verification letter that you're already using, that's fine. You can continue to use that. But if you don't have something like that, you should be using the local match verification letter. For space donation, locally, you must have documentation on how you determine the fair market value for the space. You know, maybe the entity reported it to you. But if it's donated space and they don't give you a value, you have to figure out a way to determine fair market value to back up your claims of local match. Cash and third party in kind are defined in the guidelines. Please note that it is third party in kind, which means it is a donation from someone outside your entities. So if you, or if you happen to have a sub-grantee and you use local funds to cover costs of the grant, that is actually a cash local match. It is not a third party in kind. And again, since you're reporting actual expenditures or donations, in the description column in the local match section, you need to provide detail about what the either donation was and how it was used, or what the funds were actually used for. There's some explanations here on the slide around how to report staff time and volunteer time. And finally, we found people need some clarification on this. If you get funds from a donor or from a foundation, that in and of itself isn't what you report to us. You would report to us, that would be cash, but then you would report to us how you use that fund. So maybe you got a donation and the person said, you can use this to pay for your staff to go to PACE. That would be reported as a cash conference fees, PACE registration fees, because that's how you used it. And that's what the and that's what we need to know for local match to know that it was allowable. Again, if you need any clarification on these, please reach out to your advisor. If they're not sure, they'll talk to me. In the agency activity section, the budgeted column, the budgeted amount column, the numbers need to match the proposed amounts from the grant. So you do an agency activity summary as part of the grant application. You have the requested federal amount column, requested state amount in the 064 grants. In the ones that are only state funds, you just have the one column. Those numbers from the grant need to be entered in the budgeted amount column in the FER. And then the actual expenditures column should reflect how you actually used the grant funds. So if you served fewer ABE level 5 and 6 students than you had originally intended, you should probably be shifting a little bit of money from ABE to, or from the ASE GED row to the ASE row and vice versa. We use those amounts for our federal fiscal reporting. So there's a reason we ask for this information. It's, not just to make your lives difficult. The infrastructure cost section, again, we need this information for federal reporting purposes. So you only report the amount from that grant. So, and the amount should match what you have in contracted services. And the reason we ask for it in two different places is that it allows us to double check that the information has been entered correctly and that we are reporting the correct amount. If you have subgrantees who have used some of their portion of the grant to pay infrastructure costs, that should be included in both the contracted services section as well as the total in the infrastructure costs section. Only report the amount of that grant that you used for infrastructure costs. So for example, if in your federal 064 grant, you used $3,000 of the federal 064 grant to support infrastructure costs, and then you used an additional $7,000 in local funds do not report those $7,000 to us in this infrastructure costs section. This is only asking about the portion of the grant funds that you used for infrastructure costs. You could report the other part in local match if you wanted. Also, don't include any shared personnel costs. And when you're entering things in the contracted services section, it would be best if you would enter personnel costs separately, shared personnel costs separately from infrastructure costs. And then in this section, only include the infrastructure costs. It is not concerned with any shared personnel costs at all. Career services calculations. This is only in the federal 064 and in the section 243 061 grants. Again, this is something that we are required to report in our federal reporting, which is why we collect it. The amount that you report should include the subgrantee expenditures on these career services if you have subgrantees. It covers the costs, the funds used by your program to support the 5 allowable career services. Those career services are listed in policy G100 and the guidelines of Appendix A. I will read them. So those are outreach, intake, and orientation information, initial assessment of skill levels, including literacy, numeracy, and English language proficiency, as well as aptitudes, abilities, and supportive service needs, referrals to and coordination of activities with other programs and services, provision of performance information and program cost information on eligible providers of education, training, and workforce services by program and type of provider, and provision of information on availability of supportive services or assistance and appropriate referrals. That would be things to like child care, child support, child health insurance, SNAP, EITC, etc. So when calculating the amount that you report to us for career services, you will exclude all costs that are associated with grant administration, with data entry, and with the instruction, right? You'll exclude costs associated with post-testing. But it's not as easy as just saying, okay, well, we won't include anything that's in 1691 because you report pre-testing costs in 1691, and pre-testing is a career service because it is initial assessment of skill levels. If you have teachers or student support staff who are involved in intake and orientation, the portion of their time that they spend doing that work only, intake and orientation, would be included in career services. If you have someone who is doing student recruitment work and doing outreach, in 2900, that portion of that person's time would be included in career services. So you do kind of have to think about what is the staff doing, and but at the same time, you don't say, oh, well, we'll just include everything that's in 2900 in career services, because a large portion of 2900 is actually data entry, which is not career services. So I know that this is complicated and time consuming, but it is something that we are required to report to the federal office as part of our performance reporting. And they want it to be actual expenditures, not some general estimate. There is a very detailed explanation, or there will be a detailed explanation of kind of the things to include and not to include in the FER in that section. Oh, I'm sorry. I am taking too long. Oh, here's
So
another
just
slide.
if I could
Yep.
interrupt, so we are at time, but we
Yes, I
have some more
apologize.
information. We have some more information from you. A reminder that this is being recorded and will be posted with captions if anybody has an appointment they have to go to. But I'm going to turn it back to Amanda now. We do have some more important information coming.
Sorry, I apologize. Wasn't paying attention. Here's the slide of what I just talked about. And more slides. 2023-24 kickoff will be at Patan. It is in person. It is required. August 1st is for the Section 243 grantees only. Hopefully, I will be able to let you know who you are relatively soon. We'll start at 10 a.m. And then August 2nd and 3rd will be all grantees. So adult ed, family literacy, Section 243 tutoring program, all of you. We'll start at 10 a.m. on August 2nd, and we plan to end by 2:30 p.m. on August 3rd. We are requiring the program administrator, the in-house professional development specialist, and one other staff to attend. You may bring additional staff, and we will have a process for you to register so that we'll have a count of participants who are coming. We will forward that to you once we have that all set up. Family Literacy Institute will be in fall 2023. This was mentioned last year, but it's being implemented in 23-24. It will be fully online. All family literacy programs will be required to participate. They need to be a team of the administrator, family literacy coordinator, student support specialist, and parent education instructor. We recognize that some programs will need exceptions to these requirements, and we'll provide more information, and you should submit those requests once we get everything out to you. And the Institute is going to be around helping family literacy practitioners to increase family engagement practices by unpacking the standards in the Pennsylvania's Family Engagement Birth Through College Career and Community Ready framework. And finally, we are aware that both CASAS and BEST have sent out emails saying that new versions of their tests have been approved. That's wonderful. We can't do anything until we get the formal information from OCTAE and we're able to make decisions. Generally, there is a sunset period for the old tests. We get information about whether you can combine old versions with new versions, et cetera, et cetera. So please do not run out and purchase the new tests or plan to give them anytime soon. Once we know what's going on, we will update our policies and provide you with directions. And that is the end.
Okay, so do we have any questions about anything Amanda's presented here? I don't see any questions, Amanda.
Okay, so you want to stop
I'm going to
recording?
stop the recording.